Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, the CMMC Countdown. I'm Randy Batad. I'm a co-founder and CEO of PreVeil. In case you don't know PreVeil, we make an end-to-end encrypted system for email and file storage and sharing that with a very special focus on protecting controlled unclassified information, as well as in ITAR use cases. And we have a special focus on helping the defense industrial base get compliant in a very easy and cost-effective way through the parts of the system that we can provide. We're extremely interested, like all of you, in the state of compliance and the rules and how they're evolving. And I'm super excited to have Matt Travis here. Matt is the CEO of the CyberAB, which is the accreditation body for CMMC. And we felt it was timely to just get an update on where CMMC stands, the timing of the rulemaking, what's going to happen, the implications for companies in the defense industrial base. So welcome, Matt, and thank you so much for joining us. And I'll turn it to you.
Hey, thank you, Randy, and thanks for the return invitation. Always happy to talk about CMMC and give everyone who maybe haven't been paying attention for a while an update on where things stand, especially since we last talked. The proposed rule was published in right after Christmas, and we had the public comment period, so things are moving. And let me just start, as I always have to. Anyone who watches our town hall knows I always have to issue the disclaimer that the CyberAB is an independent nonprofit 501c3 organization, so we are not part of DoD. We support DoD through a no-cost contract. So nothing that I say here today should be construed as representing official Pentagon or U.S. government policy. And just as folks tuning in for the first time, what exactly is accreditation body? What do we do? And you also might have heard the term the CAICO. What does the CAICO do? So the CAICO is kind of our sister organization. In short, we exist to instill trust and confidence in the entire CMMC program, including its ecosystem. And we do that through a number of our activities, most notably the authorization and accreditation of the C3POs, those CMMC third-party assessment organizations. We are the ones who ensure that when it comes to authorization, they have met the requirements, both administratively and operationally. They too have to go through a level 2 certification performed by the DIBCAC, or really an assessment, it's not a certification. But authorization means those C3POs have met the requirements to become a official CMMC 3PO. Once CMMC starts, we will also accredit them. And accreditation is the validation that those C3POs are operating in conformance with the CMMC rules and in accordance with international standards for inspection bodies, which is essentially what a C3PO is. So we authorize, we accredit those C3POs, but we also enforce the Code of Professional Conduct across the entire CMMC ecosystem. This is the regime that manages the conflicts of interest and the ethics and brings everyone together in the same set of rules and behaviors that govern how all the participants in the ecosystem interact with each other. We have a relatively new responsibility that was articulated in the proposed rule, in which in an appeal scenario where a DIP company gets their assessments from a C3PO, does not agree with the technical judgment or interpretation that one of the assessors may have imparted, meaning that maybe they didn't view that a certain technology meets the standard in 800-171 or a certain documentation wasn't sufficient, they can appeal the assessment's ruling. Now, that first appeal actually goes to the C3PAO, not to the assessment team, but to the corporate CCAs within the C3PAO organization. But if the DIP company is not satisfied with that outcome, the second, if you will, Court of Appeals will come back to the AB. And so we are working towards setting up a function to be able to do that transparently. And clearly, if that responsibility stays with us in the final rule, then we will be the ones kind of rendering those appeal final decisions, and in essence, probably setting some precedents for CMMC implementation. We administer the CMMC ecosystem, so anyone who wants to apply to be an assessor or a practitioner or an instructor or a publisher, they come through us. They do that through the marketplace. The CyberAB.org is where the CMMC marketplace resides. We run that. And then we also convene the ecosystem as necessary. Most obviously through our monthly town halls you may have attended. Those are conducted on the last Tuesday of every month at 6 o'clock Eastern time. They go for an hour. And also through annual conference that we run in November and other means. Our sister organization, the CAICO, is there to certify on an individual level those assessors and instructors, including the CCP, the Certified CMMC Professional, which is really that apprentice, that first level before you can become an assessor. And so the CAICO is focused on certifying those professionals in the high-stakes exams and administering the trainers and the publishers who put on the formal CMMC training. And the CAICO will also be running and managing the continuing education program for assessors and instructors when that is established a little bit after CMMC launches. So that's who we are. That's what we do. And again, just coming back to first principles before I get into some of the topics that I was kind of prompted to speak to. Why are we doing this again? So it's easy to lose the focus sometimes on what this is all about. People just hear government compliance, federal rules, and they sometimes lose sight on why this is so important. There are a lot of rules in the Code of Federal Regulations, and some of them reasonable people might deem to be somewhat trivial or overbearing or just the administrative state. But the CMMC rule isn't that. This has a real practical implication. When I was in government for a while and used to get the intel briefings, it was clear that cyber threat actors, most notably from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, as well as those global cyber criminal syndicates, are every day constantly trying to compromise, exfiltrate data from us. And they look at the weak link, and the weak link when it comes to our national security is the defense industrial base. It's much easier to compromise a private company than it is the .mil. And so that's how, especially China, has been exfiltrating not classified information, but that CUI that's so important to the procurement and acquisition activities that industry supports the Pentagon on. And so when you can look there on the slide, when you look at the J-31, that looks very similar to the F-35, and you can even read about this in the Chinese press about the similarities between some of these platforms, the Humvee, which the Dongfeng EQ 2050 was modeled after. These are very real and visible examples of how that information, that data that's in your DoD contracts can be used against us for exfiltration, reverse engineering, and also understanding our own weapon systems and platforms. So this is not DoD just trying to come up with a rule for rule's sake. This is absolutely imperative to really instilling basic cybersecurity hygiene within a very, very critical sector of our critical infrastructure, the defense industrial base. So just always like to refresh everyone on why exactly we do this. So then it comes to what's really on the minds of a lot of folks in CMMC. What are some of the things that we get asked a lot about? And the timeline of where we are, like what's happening, is certainly one of those things I'll speak to. And then an issue that PreVeil is certainly well aware of, the FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency issue that has been on many folks' radars of an area needing greater clarification. We received some of that from DoD, not both through the rule, but also through a separate memo. I'll talk about that. I'll give you an update on the CMMC ecosystem and talk about an opportunity for those companies who actually implemented 800-171 to go ahead and be an early mover and get that assessment actually prior to CMMC starting formally. That's the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, or JSVA, that I'll talk about. And we'll want to leave a good chunk of time for questions. So with that, when we talk about the timeline and where things are, we're really talking about the rulemaking. And it's important to understand that there are two CMMC rules working their way through the system. The first one, the Title 32 rule, and this gets to the sections of the Code of Federal Regulations. So Title 32 deals with national defense, and that really essentially codifies CMMC in the part of the CFR that deals with the military, deals with the Department of Defense. So that's just a good thing, because CMMC is really being established permanently as a program in the Code of Federal Regulations. This rule showed itself right around the holidays, and when you look at it, if you've read it, and it's a few hundred pages, so it's not a quick read. Gives a good history of the program, actually answered some of the rulemaking questions from CMMC 1.0. There's a glossary, some new terms in there that are of note. And they lay out really the roles and responsibilities. What does the DoD PMO do in CMMC? What does the DIBCAC do? What does the AB do? What does the CAICO do? What are responsibilities of the defense contractors themselves? Lays out the program requirements, as well as all the documentation was attached to this rule. Whereas the Title 48 rule, which we haven't seen yet in terms of the newest version of that, deals with the procurement rules and how CMMC will be integrated into defense contracts. So Title 48 is the part of the Code of Federal Regulations that deals with acquisition and procurement. That was supposed to appear in March, this last month, according to the last schedule we saw coming out of OMB. It hasn't showed itself yet, so we're still waiting on that Title 48 rule. We expect that to have a public comment period as well. And we'll see in this rule potentially some new language for the DPARS clauses. There'll be guidance for the contracting officers within DoD on how they can and should be using the CMMC requirements, and imagine a lot of it administrative language as well. So keep an eye out for that. But that's what we're talking about in terms of those two rules. And with regard to the timeline, when you apply that to kind of where we are, here's what we think the world looks like. Again, I can't stress enough that this is not anything that we have gotten from DoD. This is within the AB how we see this playing out most likely. So in red, the Title 32 rule came out, closed. The public comment period closed in February. We expect the Title 48 rule really any day now. And in both cases, DoD then has to take all the public comments that were submitted for both of those rules and adjudicate them. Meaning they have to, some of these comments, and there were, I think, close to 800 submissions. A lot of those had probably more than one question or comment. So they're probably dealing with a couple thousand questions that they have to either answer, and in some cases they may actually adjust the proposed rule language. They could add new language, they could take out language, they could clarify, add some language. So they have to answer the questions and adjudicate the comments. And that's going to take a while. And I know DoD has kind of ramped up the manpower to do that. But they've got a bit of a tight timeline. So what they need to do is adjudicate those comments and then run both of those rules back through OMB. It's technically OIRA, the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs. And that's really the office in the federal government that coordinates rulemaking. So they've got to look at it again. And then it gets published as a final rule. And why we had that slated for October prospectively is that Congress gets 60 days to review the rule before it goes into effect. And so when you look at the calendar, Congress, and it has to be in the same Congress, so you can't overlap Congresses. So we're in the last year of the 118th Congress. They're scheduled to adjourn, I think, on December 21st. So if you walk back, they get 60 days to review it. DoD really wants to get this thing published probably in the third week of October to give Congress that 60 days. If they don't get that done, then Congress can't review it until they reconvene in January, where a new Congress would take effect, and then they would get 60 days. So most likely, we don't believe that CMMC will start any sooner than March of next year. That's, in our view, the earliest that CMMC would be effective and in force. So when you see that final rule published ostensibly in October or sometime around then, that next day after it's published is not when CMMC starts. CMMC starts when the date in the final rule says it starts, and we don't think that'll be any sooner than March 2025. But that's less than a year, folks. And think back where you were, a year ago, last Easter, or the Masters start this week. It just seemed like that wasn't too long ago. And so really, if you haven't started CMMC already, the clock is literally ticking, and we'll probably talk more about that here later in the hour. But that's how we see the rest of the year playing out. What we don't know is, again, how quickly can DoD adjudicate those comments? How much time will OIRA take to re-review these two rules? By law, they get 90 days if they need it. I don't think they would need that much time this time around. And again, we don't know what that effective date of CMMC being enforced will be. So this is all kind of provisional on what we are kind of projecting that the timeline might look like. So FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency. This was an issue that is was actually mentioned now in the proposed rule. And then there was additional documentation from DoD right around the holidays as well. And the essence is this: if you as a defense contractor are using a cloud service provider, if that cloud service provider is not FedRAMP authorized, then your cloud service provider must at least achieve FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency. And now this is not, this predates CMMC. This is a DFAR 7012 clause. But the challenge was always, how do we know what equivalency is? Is equivalency close? What is equivalent? Exactly equivalent. And I think that's what the department eventually clarified, that equivalent means equivalent. So if you have a cloud service provider, not an MSP or an MSSP, the rule thankfully carved those out and created a level 2 certification path for MSPs or MSSPs called ESPs. So the FedRAMP Moderate, which we thought at one point might apply to those MSPs, it only applies to CSPs or technically the cloud service offering itself. It's not really the company, it's their cloud offering that must achieve 100% compliance with the FedRAMP Moderate Security Control Baseline. So these cloud providers must meet all of the FedRAMP Moderate Baseline. No POAMs, got to be 100%. There's no risk acceptance when it comes to equivalency, which is kind of ironic because you can be a FedRAMP authorized provider and have that FedRAMP status and actually have POAMs. But if you're looking for FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency, you can't have POAMs. That cloud service offering then must be assessed by a FedRAMP 3 PAO. So the cloud provider who's not FedRAMP must go ahead and hire a FedRAMP 3 PAO to do an assessment. And then that assessment must be presented to the contractor. So the onus really, what's important, I think, for the audience to know is that you as a DIB firm, as a DIB company, your onus is on you to be able to demonstrate that your cloud provider is FedRAMP Moderate Equivalent. So when you're getting either a DIBCAC high or a CMMC assessment, when CMMC starts, you're going to need to be able to show that, hey, this is my cloud provider that I use. They've been assessed by a 3 PAO from FedRAMP, and here's the body of evidence that tells us, the contractor, that they are equivalent. And that body of evidence has to include the SSP, includes a security assessment plan, a security assessment report, and that's what the FedRAMP 3 PAO is going to provide the cloud service provider, as well as a continuous monitoring strategy and the continuous monitoring executive summary that's required monthly, and that's got to be validated by the 3 PAO as well. So this is what, if you're a DIB contractor using that cloud provider, this is what they should be giving you. Hey, I hired a FedRAMP 3 PAO. They looked at all of us. We're 100%. Here's the SSP. Here's our SAP. Here's the SAR. Here's continuous monitoring. And then that's how you as a DIB company can show your DIBCAC assessor or your CMMC C3PO assessor that your cloud provider meets FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency. And included in that must be that they comply with the DFAR 712 clause as well. And also that they've got that, and you've got that customer responsibility matrix. So you can show the assessors, here's what my cloud provider does, here's what I do. So there may be some more questions on this. I'm happy to try to field in the Q&A, Randy. But this is really, I think, clarification on what equivalency is. It's not a trivial effort. So if you do have a cloud provider that you use and you have aspirations on getting CMMC certified, you should probably call them up and make sure that they're aware of this, because they, like you, need to get started now, not once CMMC starts. All right, so that's FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency. What does the CMMC ecosystem look like these days? This is what we spend a lot of our time doing, is really trying to build the capacity to ensure that the ecosystem is ready for CMMC launch as well. And when I think about that at the AB side, we spend a lot of time trying to get the candidate C3POs into an authorized status. Right now we have 51 of them. So there are 51 C3POs who have met the requirements of being a C3PO, have passed their DIBCAC assessment, are now in an authorized state in the marketplace. We've got another 240 C3PO candidates who are working towards getting authorization, either meeting, getting themselves, implementing 800.171, getting all their administrative requirements in order. And then 179 others who applied to be a C3PO, but we've not been able to discern any actual effort towards getting authorized just yet. People ask me, how many C3POs do we need? We need more than 51. We're probably not going to need all 488, whatever the number is there. But we certainly are probably paying more attention to the assessors than actually the C3POs. We also have a very strong practitioner community. This is why they exist, is to help DIB companies implement CMMC and get ready for their assessment. RPs, the registered practitioners, those with the advanced designation as registered practitioner advanced, or RPAs, and then the companies they often work for RPOs. They exist in the marketplace to help you with your CMMC journey. I highly encourage you to check them out. We've got a great cadre of folks and companies there. But when it comes to the assessors, this is really where I think the long pole in the tent is going to be in terms of getting to scale. Right now, we've got little over, this is probably dated by a couple of weeks, a little over 200 CCAs actually who are certified. We had another about 200 who have taken the exam, or taken the training rather, but not taken the exam. So that's not enough, right? We're going to need a few thousand, not a few hundred CCAs. I recognize why right now there's no way to really monetize the investment in being a CCA other than the joint surveillance program. So we've got a lot of folks you see who have actually taken the CCP course and have stopped there. They haven't taken the CCP exam. We certainly hope many of those go on to take the CCA course and the CCA exam. And so we certainly in the CAICO will be more vocal in trying to recruit more folks into the assessor cadre. It's a great way to get into cybersecurity. It can be, I think, a very fulfilling and rewarding occupation, whether that's full-time or part-time. I think the compensation will be attractive, and it's just a great way to help your country, shore up its industrial base from digital risk. So that's really where I look at. We need more of those CCAs. That's what's going to be, getting this ecosystem to scale. Not that we need to be there tomorrow, but certainly we hope to see growth in that number throughout the rest of this year and into 2025. So I talk about joint surveillance. What is joint surveillance? Well, that is the opportunity for DIB companies who have implemented 800-171 and want to get assessed to work with an authorized C3PO and the DIBCAC to get that assessment done now prior to CMMC. So while it's not a CMMC certification assessment, if you look at the proposed rule, there's a provision in there that companies that go through the joint surveillance program and score 100%, and you can have a POAM that's cleared within 180 days, you're going to get a level 2. If the final rule contains this, what was in the proposed rule, you will get conversion to a CMMC level 2 certification when CMMC begins. So why is this attractive? Well, one, you're going to be able to differentiate yourself from others in getting that certification on day one or week one when CMMC is launched. And you'll be first one to be able to say, hey, I'm certified. And also, frankly, those MSP certification requirements, which are in CMMC, are not in effect right now. So if you've got an MSP or an MSSP, they're going to get the CRM with your MSPs will be part of the assessment, but they themselves don't have to be a level 2 certified, which they will when CMMC starts. So there is a little bit of difference there that may make it less difficult to get through if your MSP, MSSP is not implemented the controls that they'll need to under CMMC rules. Why do they call this joint surveillance? Well, joint surveillance is the authority that the DIBCAC has to bring in industry to help them execute their mission. It's not unlike if you've had a DCAA audit and they may use private sector accountants or auditors to do the audit, or if DCSA hires contract background investigators. So this is DCMA, the Defense Contract Management Agency, using qualified people and companies from industry, i.e. the C3POs, to conduct what is technically a DIBCAC high assessment. But again, in the rule, those assessments will convert to level 2. So these are the companies. You can reach out to any of them. All 51 of these companies are eligible to conduct your joint surveillance assessment. I should note that you as the DIB company pay the C3PO. You don't pay DIBCAC. You don't pay us. There's no application fee. You essentially call up one of these C3POs, begin the conversation, and then if you want to go forward, They submit your name and information, your cage code, POC, your address, and then the process begins. And it's worked very well in terms of getting some of these early movers assessed. They certainly are, we are appreciative of industry within the DIB leaning forward. In many cases, you have had the 7012 clause in your contracts. You're already on the hook for implementing 800-171. This is a great opportunity just to go ahead and prove it, show that you not only talk the talk, but you walk the walk with DoD on this. So happy to talk about this, Randy, in the Q&A. So that's the Joint Surveillance Program, and then I'll end my formal discussion here with just a reminder that next March, and that's the earliest, but still, that's not far away. We're less than a year. The requirements are not going to change. People might think, well, I'm going to wait to see what the final rule says, and maybe there'll be less requirements or fewer requirements in the final rule. I don't expect the final rule to look much different from the proposed rule. There may be some adjusted language. There may be more information on things like the ESP certifications for MSPs or MSSPs. But DoD has said consistently that, when they launched CMMC 2.0 back in November of 2021, that this was the program. And that's what we saw in the proposed rule. So don't wait. The final rule is not going to save you. Help is out there in the practitioner community and elsewhere to help you implement CMMC. And this is not something that you can just delegate to your mid-level IT admin personnel. As frustrated we've been with how long rulemaking has taken, it has provided additional opportunity for you to get caught up. A lot of folks were skeptical whether or not we'd ever get to this point where we'd even see a proposed rule. So don't think that there'll be additional delays. And take advantage of the time you have between now and next March. And talk to your external service providers. This is a great time to start the conversation. Don't be surprised with not having reached out to your MSPs or your CSPs, and make sure that they understand what your requirements are going to be. And if they're truly your partner, they'll take that conversation seriously. I say the future is now because this is we've really actually started through joint surveillance, through what you see in the rule. CMMC may not be enforced. But the ecosystem is there. We know what's coming in terms of the rules, and this is what the world's going to look like. I get asked a lot about, well, what about outside of DoD? I think if you just read the tea leaves and see the statements coming out of OMB, the White House, what have you, I would certainly expect the rest of the civilian executive branch contracting landscape to kind of follow in eventually DoD's wake and join on to 800-171 as that unified standard, and using that third-party assessment as a way to validate and certify basic cyber hygiene. The government wants to know its business partners are protecting its data. People talk about compliance. I always like to kind of, point out it's really conformance. This is the standard that DoD has set for its business partners. And if you're in the market of supporting DoD, well, then market conditions have changed, and this is a standard that they want you to attain in order to be stewards of their data. It's not an inspection like, with people coming in a checklist looking for you to fail. It is an assessor coming in to assess whether or not you meet the standard. So let's all meet the standard. Let's help DoD secure its industrial base, and let's do our part to make cybersecurity something we're actually doing and not just talking about. So, Randy, I'll pause there and happy to jump into the Q&A.
There are a bunch of questions related to service providers, MSPs, and so forth. Can you elaborate just a little bit more on what are the requirements of managed service providers or other consultants that are working with companies that may not be cloud service providers per se?
Yeah, so let me step back just a bit. So before this proposed rule, the concern that we had is that DoD had never articulated that MSPs or MSSPs were different than cloud service providers. And the way you look at the terminology and the documentation from DoD instructions and what have you would lead one to think that your MSP or MSSP would have to get FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency as well. And that would be a whole hot mess right there in terms of the cost and effort for MSPs to achieve that, let alone cloud service providers. So what we have in the proposed rule is two lanes, right? And the overarching term is external service providers, right? So your external service providers are essentially DoD's way of saying MSPs and MSSPs, which are separate from cloud service providers. So your cloud service provider either better be FedRAMP authorized, and to get authorized, you have to have a government sponsor. So not every cloud service provider can get authorization in FedRAMP, but they can get FedRAMP Moderate Equivalency, which I just talked through. That's cloud providers. Your MSPs and MSSPs, under the proposed rule, will be able to get level 2 certified. So just like you, the DIP company, they're going to need to get certified to level 2. Now, it raises a couple of practical questions, which is, well, if I'm trying to get certified, but my MSP or MSSP isn't, don't they need to go first? Yeah, probably, right? So we're probably looking at how do we ensure that MSPs can get that certification assessment done. Otherwise, a lot of their customers are going to be caught outside waiting. The second thing as well is that EMAS is the IT system of record within DoD that's going to manage all the certification information. That's based on CAGE codes as the basic identifying unit of what is being certified. So do we need to have MSP start applying for CAGE codes? We may have to look at that as well. So there's some practical implications of that I would hope the proposed rule will help flesh out a bit more. But the real headline to your question, Randy, is your MSP or MSSP is going to need to get level 2 certified if you yourself are attempting to get level 2 certified.
Orly, I know you have some folks that you want to call on to ask some specific questions too. Why don't we start with one of those?
All right. Thank you very much, Randy, and thank you, Matt, for the great presentation. So we had some people who sent in some great questions, and we are going to call on them because we think they asked questions that were really relevant to the greater community here. So the first question, first asker is Benjamin Huntsman. So Ben, I see you right here in my panel, so I'm going to allow you to talk. And why don't you just introduce yourself and say what company you're from, and then jump into your question.
So I am Ben Huntsman. I'm with FFI Systems. I'm actually located in Japan. As far as I know, I'm the only currently certified CCP in Japan.
Excellent.
And the only one that I've talked to that is even considering working in Japan. So my question kind of has to relate to foreign countries. So on various forums, all over the internet, I've seen many DIB members that are representing foreign countries or are foreign companies who have concerns about this CMMC requirements. But there are really so few individuals in their countries ready to really help them, assist them, not even including C3PO help or anything like that. That's just getting help to prepare them in some way. And if they need to rely on consultants from the U.S. to do this, it's going to be really catastrophically cost prohibitive for them. So my question really is, how are the DoD and the CyberAB currently preparing to meet their needs?
Yeah, Benjamin, great question. Thanks for, I assume, waking up or staying up late, whatever time it's in Japan. And lot to walk through there. The bottom line is you're absolutely right. So there are a number of foreign companies that support U.S. primes, and they are going to have to get CMMC certified if that requirement's in their contract. Right now, there is there's nothing prohibiting a foreign-based company from getting CMMC certified. The challenge is going to be obviously the time distance. Some assessments may be able to conduct it purely virtually, but when we have physical security controls that need to be validated, people have to get on planes and go do that. In terms of where you are, I do know that I've met with delegations from Japan. I can even probably connect you to some of the folks. There's a growing CMMC. At least I've discovered a couple of pockets in South Korea, Taiwan, Japan that happy to connect you to. And we hope to see a growing cadre of practitioners and C3POs need to be U.S. based. So we're not going to have any C3POs based out of Japan unless DoD changes the requirements. But there's nothing prohibiting practitioners, RPOs, RPs, RPAs, even I think instructors, or even frankly CCAs. Now DoD has a requirement about an assessor working on a CMMC assessment having to be a U.S. citizen, but but getting the certification as a CCA is certainly open to foreign partners as well. In terms of what DoD is doing and reciprocity for other programs, you might have heard Canada is starting their own CMMC program. It's going to look probably identical to ours, tied to 800-171. They're looking for full reciprocity. There's been other countries in Europe that we've talked to and DoD's talked to. In terms of the government to government or MOD to DoD, that's all going to be bilaterally negotiated. And so I think you just have to stay tuned. They can't do anything until the rule is final. And then I think DoD will, as they've been, continue to engage some international partners on how best to set up the reciprocity rules. But to come back, I think, to your original question, for companies operating in Japan or elsewhere supporting U.S. primes, they can contact C3POs about how an assessment would work when CMMC starts. They can also reach out to an RPO and start getting help now. I hope that helps, Benjamin.
All right. Matt, thank you very much. And Ben, thank you very much. I'm going to take the next person, Kathy Spears. Kathy, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself, say what company you're from, and ask your question.
Hi. Yes, I go by Kat, but yes, it's Kathy Spears if I get in trouble. I'm with Manpower Group Public Sector. We're in the DC area, and we support various contracts. As we are working, and this is on behalf of a colleague that was not able to attend, I actually have another question, if time allows later. As we work through our CMMC pre-certification process, we've enhanced and augmented processes where we've identified gaps. Given that, we have areas that do not have much evidence as the processes are newly implemented. Question is, what is the best way to document this situation for an audit? And thank you.
Hey, thanks, Kath. So one change from CMMC 1.0 to 2.0 is that DoD stripped away some of the extra maturity requirements that were in 1.0 that required you to show that these practices had been in place and been followed and inculcated for a period of time. Those were pulled away. So those aren't part of CMMC 2.0. So when an assessment is occurring, they're going to want to see that a practice or control has been implemented and there's evidence. That evidence can be from a documentation. It can be from a demonstration. So show me how your MFA works, or from interviews. They're going to talk to an employee and ask them, hey, how does your MFA work? So, as long as you have that SSP, that system security plan, and have the policies and procedures, and you've got people who understand the policies and procedures, and you can technically show screenshots or screen shares of how it works, you should be fine. If you're concerned about it, you just implemented this, a few months ago, maturity is no longer a requirement. Now that, if you look at Rev 3 for 800-171, you can see some of those maturity requirements coming into the future NIST standard, and eventually I would expect that Rev 3 at some point in the future will become the CMMC standard, but not yet, not now. So maturity is not something you have to worry about too much. I just focus on getting all the 110 controls in place.
All right. Thank you very much for your question, Kathy. I'm going to go on to just one last question from Faisal. And Faisal, I'm going to allow you to talk. So please go ahead and ask your question.
My name is Faisal Farouk. I am with Amazon Web Services. Thank you for the webinar. Really helpful for me to learn about CMMC and the tangential areas. My question is, what are the challenges contractors are facing in passing their C3POs, like JSVAs, just to overall what you have seen and some pointers you can highlight.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Faisal. We're not privy to the actual joint surveillance assessments. We serve in that kind of coordination role, helping the scheduling and the nomination process, but we are not attending the assessments. That said, from what I kind of glean from folks talking, a couple things come to mind. The scoping is so important, and understanding, what's on your network, who's on your network, and making that COI scoping precise and that you're familiar with it. So there's been some trip ups on organizations not fully understanding how to scope their network. So the scoping guide, getting familiar with that would be helpful. And the other one I would say is the FIPS encryption is that's probably the hardest one that trips people up. And there I'd refer everyone to a good RPO or an RPA that is spends a lot of their time looking at various approaches to the FIPS encryption requirement. But that's probably the two biggest areas that I always hear about: scoping and FIPS.
Matt, let me throw the one final one, because we only have a minute or two left out there, because I see a lot of questions that all relate to a similar kind of theme. Could you spend a minute? There's like questions like, well, if I have so many seats and they're not touching CUI, do those people have to be certified or not? What about my MSP if they're touching or not? What about my cloud service provider if it's running in a FedRAMP cloud or not? Maybe just a little background on, walling off CUI, the systems that touch it, the people that touch it, and what does that mean for compliance? I think maybe that grounding would be helpful for a lot of people.
Well, I think the thing that I would encourage people to do is the tighter your scoping, the easier your assessment is going to be, right? If you can really, whether it's an enclave or what have you, if you have a boundary of where your CUI resides that is all over the place, you're going to have more people potentially touching it, more external service providers that may be in the play. And so, work with your network architects to really try to scope it down and keep it as a tight bound. That's probably the best thing I can do. There's a lot of one-off, hey, how about this? How about that? That's not really what we answer. That's what the practitioners are for. So I'd really encourage, this goes back to my point about getting help. They're great questions that you just referenced there, Randy, real quickly. And that's the time to pick up the phone and reach out to a RP or an RPO.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. This has been super, super helpful. We really, really appreciate your coming out and talking to the community here, taking questions. We could go all day long.